The first mortar round hit before her boots touched the ground. Emily Carter felt the pressure wave slam into her chest as the CH-47 banked hard. Below, FOB Kestrel was already burning. Black smoke punched through 120-degree air in thick, oily columns. Secondary explosions rippled across the motor pool. She jumped anyway. Sand hit her face like broken glass. She rolled, found cover behind a HESCO barrier, M4 up, aimed at nothing but smoke and chaos. A hand grabbed her shoulder. Jack Donovan. Older. Grayer. Same eyes. Calm in a way only men who'd seen worse could manage. "You shouldn't have come back, Captain." She looked past him. The tactical board. Red markers. Everywhere. The Northern Road, their only extraction route, marked with a single word. Compromised. War didn't start when she arrived. It had been waiting for her return. The house in Boerne, Texas smelled like coffee and cut grass. Emily Carter stood at the kitchen window in bare feet, watching the sprinkler arc across the lawn in slow mechanical loops. 6:15 in the morning. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, purple fading into orange at the edges. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at nothing in particular. She poured her second cup and didn't drink it. The television was on in the other room, volume low. She could hear the anchor's voice without making out the words. That was intentional. She'd learned in the 14 months since her discharge that the news was something you could have in a room without letting it into your head. Background noise. Static. The auditory equivalent of a white wall. She'd gotten good at white walls. Her lease ran through March. She had a consulting contract with a private security firm in San Antonio. 3 days a week, teaching situational awareness to corporate risk managers who'd never been closer to a firefight than an action movie. The pay was decent. The work was quiet. Nobody shot at her. She was fine. That was the word she used when people asked. Fine. Short enough that it didn't invite follow-up. Accurate enough that she could say it without flinching. Her sister called every Sunday and asked how she was doing, and Emily said fine, and her sister said good, and they talked about other things. Their mother's hip replacement, a cousin's wedding, the price of groceries, normal things, civilian things. Emily was 30 seconds into her third attempt to drink the coffee when the television anchor's voice changed pitch. She walked to the doorway. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, U.S. forces engaged, multiple FOBs under coordinated attack, Middle East theater. She watched for 45 seconds. Then she walked back to the kitchen, poured the coffee down the drain, and went to get dressed. She drove to the gym at 7 because it was better than sitting in the house watching a map fill up with red markers. The gym was a converted warehouse on the edge of town. Free weights, a heavy bag, a pull-up rig. No mirrors. She liked that about it. She did 40 minutes on the bag, then ran 5 miles on a treadmill facing a concrete wall. And by the time she was done, the news was still playing on the flat screen, bolted to the ceiling, and the situation in the Middle East had not improved. 3 FOBs hit in a coordinated strike. Communication blackouts reported at 2 of them. No casualty numbers yet. She drove home. She showered. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, reading every publicly available report she could find, which amounted to almost nothing. The DoD was giving out the minimum. That meant the situation was either under control or it was bad enough that they didn't want the numbers public yet. She'd seen both. She knew which one felt like this. Her phone rang at 11:14. She looked at the screen. The number was a Virginia area code she didn't recognize. She let it ring. It stopped. It rang again. She picked up. Captain Carter. The voice was male, mid-50s, the flat mid-Atlantic accent of a career bureaucrat. This is Colonel Richard Hargrove, Joint Staff. I apologize for the direct contact. I got your number through your discharge liaison. I'm not Captain anything, Emily said. I discharged 14 months ago. I'm aware of that. A pause. Not uncomfortable, calculated. The kind of pause that meant the next sentence had been prepared in advance. We have a situation developing at FOB Kestrel. We're pulling together a rapid advisory panel. Your name came up. My name comes up for a lot of things I don't do anymore. Captain Carter, she said. Just Carter. Another pause. Ms. Carter, we're talking about a 72-hour deployment, advisor role. You'd be attached to the QRF command element. No trigger pulling. We need someone who knows that FOB, the layout, the personnel, the specific tactical challenges of that terrain. She knew FOB Kestrel. She'd spent 11 months there. She knew the blind spots in the perimeter, the way the dust storms came in from the northwest with no warning, the particular way the heat made distances deceptive after noon. She knew which generators ran loud and which ones cut out without warning. She knew the drainage pattern of the eastern approach after rainfall, how it turned the sand into something close to concrete in certain channels and soft as powder in others. She also knew that 11 months at Kestrel was the reason she'd needed 14 months of sprinklers and coffee and white walls. I'll think about it, she said. We'd need an answer by tonight. She hung up. She sat at the table for a long time. The sprinkler was still running outside. Methodical, mechanical, indifferent. She thought about the young soldiers she'd seen on the news footage. Body armor that didn't quite fit right. The particular way green troops held their rifles when the shooting started. Too tight, both hands white-knuckle, like they thought squeezing harder would make it more accurate. She thought about what happened to green troops when nobody steadied them. Her phone rang again at 2 in the afternoon. She already knew it wasn't going to be Virginia. Jack Donovan's voice was exactly the same as she remembered. Unhurried, gravel-textured, the voice of a man who had decided a long time ago that there was no situation that couldn't be made worse by raising the volume. They called you, he said. It wasn't a question. How do you know that? Because they called me first and I told them to call you. A beat. You going to say yes? Emily walked out to the back porch and sat on the step. The heat was still thick, even at 2 in the afternoon. Texas heat, nothing like the desert, but enough to make her squint. I told them I'd think about it. That means yes, and you know it. It means I'm thinking. She could hear him exhale. Not impatience, something more careful than that. Jack Donovan had been sergeant major for 14 years before he retired. He'd commanded men in 4 different combat theaters. He didn't do impatience. What he did was the kind of quiet that had weight to it, the kind that made you feel the space where words weren't. How are you doing? He asked. Fine. There's that word again. She almost smiled. What does that mean? Means every time I call you and ask how you're doing, you say, fine. And every time I hear you say it, you sound a little less like someone who means it, and a little more like someone who's practiced saying it. She didn't answer that. Emily. His voice shifted, dropped, half a register. He only used her first name when he was saying something he'd thought about in advance. I know what Kestrel cost you. I was there for the end of it. I know what you left behind when you discharged. Then you know why I'm thinking about it and not just saying yes. I know why you should say no, he said. I also know that you've been sitting in that house in Bernie watching the news all day because you can't make yourself turn it off. Because those kids are there, and you're here, and that gap is eating at you right now, whether you admit it or not. She stared at the fence line. A mockingbird landed on the post, tilted its head at her, and flew away. They're green, Jack continued, the platoon at Kestrel. Most of them have never taken contact. Their lieutenant is 23 years old and good on paper, and I have exactly 0 confidence in what he's going to do the first time a mortar round lands inside the wire. What are you going to do? She asked. Are you going? A pause. Jack. I'm already packed, he said. She closed her eyes. She knew him well enough to know that wasn't bravado. Jack Donovan was 63 years old and had 2 replaced knees and a shoulder that ached when the barometric pressure dropped. He was packed because he decided, in the same quiet, methodical way he decided everything, that those kids needed someone with experience in that particular terrain, and that the particular sin of being able to help and not helping was one he wasn't willing to carry. He was going whether she said yes or not. "Don't do that," she said quietly. "Don't do what?" "Don't make it so I can't say no." "I'm not making you do anything." His voice was gentle. "But I'm not going to pretend I don't think you should come. Not because the Army needs you, because I think you need this. Closure looks different for different people. Sometimes it looks like staying away. Sometimes it looks like going back once more and doing it right and walking away knowing you gave everything you had." She sat with that for a moment. The sprinkler had timed out. The lawn was quiet. The mockingbird was back on the fence post. 72 hours, she said. "That's what they're saying. And you'll be there. Every step." She was quiet for another moment. Then, "I'm not re-enlisting, Jack. I'm not going back to that. This is the last time." "I know," he said. "I mean it. I know you do." Another exhale, slower this time. Something that might have been relief, or might have been the weight of a decision he hadn't been entirely sure she'd make. "Pack light. Desert loadout. I'll send you the manifest." He hung up. She sat on the back step for a long time after that, watching the mockingbird on the fence post do what mockingbirds do, cycling through a dozen different songs, each one borrowed from something else, none of them entirely its own. She went inside and found her duffel bag in the hall closet. The C-130 smelled like hydraulic fluid and anxiety. 31 passengers. Emily counted them out of habit. Mostly logistics personnel, quartermasters, comtechs, a medical team of 4. 3 other civilian contractors she didn't recognize, each of them with the particular 1,000-yard stillness of people trying to convince themselves they weren't scared. Jack sat across the aisle from her, reading a paper manual with a flashlight clipped to his collar. Reading glasses. She'd never seen him in reading glasses before. That small detail landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. He was old. He was genuinely, physically old, and he was on this airplane anyway. She looked away before he could catch her looking. "What are you thinking?" he asked, without looking up from the manual. "Nothing. You've got the face you make when you're cataloging problems." "I have a face for that?" Subtle squint, jaw muscle. He turned a page. "You've had it since Fort Benning. Some things don't change." She let out a breath. "I'm thinking about the layout changes since I left. 11 months is long enough that they might have shifted the perimeter, repositioned the hardened structures. I don't want to go in assuming my mental map is current." "It's not." He finally looked up. "They extended the eastern wall by 60 meters in February. New generator station on the south side, which means the original fuel depot moved. Comm bunker is in the same place, but they added a secondary antenna array. You've been keeping up with the site reports." "I requested them 6 months ago." He went back to the manual. "When the situation in the region started trending." She looked at him for a long moment. "You knew this was coming." "I thought it was possible." His voice was even. "I submitted a formal advisory to Joint Staff in November. Flagged the specific vulnerability pattern at Kestrel, the terrain, the supply line exposure, the ratio of experienced to green personnel." A pause. "They thanked me for my input." Something in his tone made her be still. "Jack, I'll tell you more when we're on the ground." He closed the manual. "Get some sleep. We land in 4 hours, and it's going to be a long 72. She didn't sleep. She sat in the red-lit belly of the C-130 and listened to the engines and thought about the particular gap between experience and decision-making authority. The gap where warnings went to be filed and forgotten, while the thing you warned about gathered momentum. She'd been inside that gap before. She knew what it felt like when it finally closed. Around hour 2, one of the civilian contractors across the aisle caught her eye. Mid-40s, trim build, badge clipped to a vest that was slightly too clean to have seen any real field time. He had a laptop open on a portable tray, working through something with quiet efficiency. Spreadsheets, logistics, manifests by the look of them. He gave her a practiced, professional nod. She nodded back. Something about him snagged briefly at the edge of her attention. She couldn't place it. The nod was too rehearsed, maybe. The particular micro-expression of someone who had learned to project calm rather than someone who naturally possessed it. But that description covered half the people on this airplane, including herself. She filed the observation and let it go. Jack had put the manual away and was asleep against the fuselage with the focused efficiency of a man who had decided that sleep was a resource like any other. She watched him for a moment, counted his breaths. Steady, even. The kind of rest that came from a clean conscience, or from being too experienced to waste energy on anxiety. She thought about what he'd said. Closure looks different for different people. 14 months in Bernie. The sprinklers in the coffee, in the consulting contract. She had told herself it was recovery. She had told herself the distance was intentional, therapeutic, the right choice. And maybe it had been all of those things simultaneously. But she had also spent 14 months waking at 0400 and lying in the dark, listening for sounds that weren't there, running tactical assessments of a house that didn't need them. The body remembered the operational rhythm. It didn't ask permission to maintain it. She'd been good at Kestrel. She hadn't let herself think about that very much. The contractor with the laptop closed it, tucked it into a hard-sided case, and went to sleep. 4 hours to landing. The heat was a physical thing. Not warmth, not discomfort. A weight, pressing down from above and radiating up through the soles of her boots simultaneously, as if the air itself had decided to become structural. 122 Fahrenheit at 1400 hours. She felt it in her teeth within the first 30 seconds. Fuck! Kestrel sat in a shallow depression surrounded by low ridgelines on 3 sides. Defensible terrain, in theory. In practice, those ridgelines were also excellent elevated firing positions for anyone with the patience to wait. Emily had spent 11 months watching those ridgelines with the particular vigilance of someone who understood that patience was the one resource an enemy always had more of. The CH-47 set down hard on the landing pad. She was third off. The mortar round hit as her left boot found the ground. The pressure wave came first. Not sound, not yet, just a wall of compressed air that shoved her sideways and filled her sinuses with fine grit. Then the sound arrived, a flat, cracking boom that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Then the secondary, something in the motor pool cooking off, a chain of sharp reports like a giant running down a metal xylophone. She was behind a HESCO barrier before the echo died. Training, not thought. The body remembering what the mind hadn't been asked to consciously retrieve in 14 months. She had her M4 up. There was nothing to aim at. Black smoke was boiling up from the south side of the FOB in dense, rolling columns. Personnel were moving through it, some with purpose, some with the stunned, disconnected gait of people whose brains hadn't yet caught up to the fact that they were in a firefight. Carter, Jack's voice, at her shoulder. He'd covered the same ground in the same time, moving with a fluency that didn't match his age. His left knee caught slightly on the last step. She saw it, filed it away. Comms, she said. Trying. He had a handset up, static. He tried 2 frequencies, more static. Blackout, they're jamming. She looked south, then east, then north. North was where the tactical board was, a freestanding display someone had set up in the briefing area that was now open to the sky because whatever had hit the motor pool had taken out part of the adjacent structure's wall. She moved to it at a low crouch with Jack at her 6. The map was handwritten updates overlaid on a printed base. Red markers. She absorbed it in 4 seconds. Northern Road, Compromised. Enemy infantry confirmed at the first crossroads, 2 kilometers out. Eastern approach. Unknown. No contact, no intel. Blank space. Southern perimeter. Active contact, 3 positions. Western road. Convoy delayed. Last contact 6 hours ago. 6 hours. The resupply convoy had gone silent 6 hours ago, and nobody had told her that on the airplane. She looked at Jack. His face said he'd seen it too. "They're not delayed," she said. "No," he said, "they're not." His name was Lieutenant Derek Marsh, and he was exactly 23 years old, and he was standing in the middle of the command post with a radio handset in each hand, and the particular look on his face of a man who had prepared extensively for a test and was now being given a completely different one. He was not panicking. Emily gave him that. His hands were steady. His voice, when he spoke to the 2 NCOs clustered around the map table, was controlled. But his eyes were moving too fast, scanning everything, landing on nothing, the visual equivalent of a man trying to read 6 books simultaneously. Emily stepped in front of him. "Lieutenant Marsh." She kept her voice flat and level. "Command register. Not aggressive, not warm." The particular vocal frequency that cut through noise and demanded a single point of focus. "I'm Carter, civilian advisor, attached to your command element per Colonel Hargrove. I need a sit rep in 60 seconds. Start with personnel." He blinked, focused, the eye movement slowed. 118 assigned, 94 accounted for. 12 on the perimeter, 6 in medical, 4 in the comm bunker. Rest are either in position or... He stopped. "We have some unaccounted." "How many?" 8. "We had 2 patrols outside the wire when the attack started." She looked at Jack. He was already at the map, checking the patrol routes. "Radio contact?" she asked. "Negative, since the blackout." She absorbed that. 8 soldiers outside the wire, no communication, attack in progress. "Okay, what's your current priority of effort?" "Maintaining the southern perimeter. That's where the contact is heaviest." "Good, keep that. I need you to also get someone on the eastern approach. Right now, eyes only, no engagement unless forced. That blank space on your map worries me more than the noise in the south." "Why?" "Because the noise in the south is where they want you looking." She watched it land on him. The shift from reactive to analytical. The moment a young officer's brain starts thinking 2 steps instead of 1. It was subtle, but it was real. "Sergeant Kowalski," Marsh said, turning to the taller of the 2 NCOs. "Take 2 personnel, eastern wall, eyes and ears, report back in 15. Good. He could take instruction. That was a start. "One more thing," Emily said. "Your convoy. Tell me everything you know about the last communication." He told her. 6 hours and 40 minutes ago. Routine check-in, no anomalies reported. Then silence. She looked at the map. 6 hours and 40 minutes ago, the attack had not yet begun, which meant the convoy hadn't been hit during the chaos of the opening strike. It had gone silent before the attack, which meant someone had known the attack was coming before it arrived. She filed that thought in a specific part of her mind, the part that didn't forget things, the part that would come back to it when there was space. Right now there wasn't space. "Jack," she said. "Already on it," he said from the map table. He'd found the patrol routes. He was calculating. Another mortar round hit the northern sector, closer this time, close enough that the floor of the command post shuddered under her boots, and a shelf of radio equipment rattled, and someone outside shouted a warning that arrived half a second too late to be useful. The war had been waiting for her return. Now it had her full attention. The communications blackout lasted 40 minutes. When the first channels opened, the traffic was immediate and overwhelming. Unit positions, casualty reports, resupply requests stacking up in the queue like vehicles at a broken checkpoint. Emily stood at the comm bunker's secondary station and filtered, prioritizing, routing, passing critical traffic to Marsh and letting the lower-tier requests queue. She was good at this. The organizational architecture of a firefight, the information triage, this was where her particular kind of intelligence worked best. Pattern recognition under pressure, finding the signal in the noise. It was the noise that caught her attention first, not the content of any specific transmission, the pattern. She'd been at the secondary station for 20 minutes when she noticed that 3 of the incoming reports contained position data that was more precise than it should have been. Not grid coordinates, those were standard, something subtler. The specific language used to describe the attack vectors. The way the enemy had moved, not probing, not testing the perimeter the way a force with limited intel would. Deliberate, informed. She pulled the timing data on the initial mortar strike. The first round had landed at 14:02. The CH-47 carrying her and Jack and the logistics team had been wheels up from the rear echelon base at 11:47. The flight time was approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes. Departure time, destination, and passenger manifest had all been filed in the base operations system at 11:30. The attack had started within minutes of their landing. She ran the calculation twice. Then she found the FOB's communications log for the preceding 24 hours and started reading. She wasn't looking for anything specific. She was looking for the thing that was slightly too clean, the transmission that was formatted correctly, routed correctly, but shouldn't have existed. In her experience, when information leaked out of a secure system, it rarely looked like sabotage. It looked like procedure. It looked like someone doing their job. She found it at 1118. A routine logistics update sent through the base operations channel to a regional coordination hub. Standard format, correct authorization codes. Filed by a civilian contractor embedded with the FOB's support element. The update contained, buried in the standard boilerplate, a field that had been modified. A single line in the equipment manifest that referenced incoming advisory personnel and their estimated time on ground. It wasn't a transmission that should have existed at all. Civilian contractors didn't have access to advisory personnel manifests. That data lived in a separate system. Somebody had bridged those systems. She pulled the contractor's access log. 3 weeks of activity, all of it routine, nothing that would have flagged an automated audit. Whoever had done this knew the system, knew which fields were monitored and which ones weren't, knew that a single line buried in a logistics manifest would move through the pipeline without triggering a review. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't opportunistic. It was patient. She cross-referenced the contractor ID against the passenger manifest for her flight. She found the match. The same contractor ID. The same badge number she'd noted in the manifest header. She'd been on the same airplane as him for 2.5 hours. He'd nodded at her on the C-130. She let that sit for a moment. The specific quality of that nod. Professional, practiced, calibrated. Not the nod of someone who recognized her. The nod of someone who already knew exactly who she was. She stared at the screen for 3 full seconds. Then she closed the log, committed the contractor ID to memory, and went back to routing comm traffic. She didn't say anything yet. There was a siege to survive first. The identity of whoever had sold their coordinates could wait until there was time to deal with it properly. But she knew, now, what kind of story this was. It wasn't just a siege, it was a setup. The first organized assault came at 1900 hours. Not the probing fire they'd been trading all afternoon. This was coordinated. 3 attack vectors moving simultaneously from the south and southeast, suppressing fire from the ridgeline to the northwest. Emily heard the change in the enemy's rhythm before she saw it. The incoming fire shifted from sporadic to sustained, overlapping, designed to keep heads down while the assault elements closed distance. "They're moving," she said. Marsh was already on the radio. All stations, contact south, contact southeast. Hold your positions. Do not break cover to engage. Let them come to the wire." Good. He'd remembered what she'd told him 2 hours ago. Don't chase the noise. She moved to the southern wall. The light was failing. The desert turned colors in the last hour before dark. Amber to copper to a deep red-gray that played tricks with distance. Shapes moved at 300 meters. She counted 6, 7, 8, more in the shadows behind them. She keyed her radio. Sergeant Kowalski, Eastern Wall, report. Nothing on the east yet, Captain. Ground's quiet. Keep watching. She put her eye back to her optic. The assault elements were moving in bounding pairs. One man sprinting, one man covering, leapfrogging toward the wire in 30-meter rushes. Disciplined. These weren't irregulars. These were trained fighters who had done this before. The M240 on the south wall opened up. Tracer rounds cut bright orange lines across the darkening desert. The assault slowed but didn't stop. 2 of the shapes went down. The rest found cover in the rocks and low scrub and kept moving. Then the RPG hit the south wall's machine gun position. The explosion was close enough that Emily felt the overpressure in her chest cavity. She pressed herself against the HESCO and waited for the debris to stop falling. Sand, gravel, something wet that she didn't look at. She keyed her radio. Kowalski, south wall gun is down. I need you to reposition one element to cover that sector. Copy. She moved. The next 40 minutes were the controlled chaos that combat always was at the small unit level. Not the choreographed efficiency of training exercises, but the grinding, adaptive, moment-to-moment problem-solving of real contact. A position goes down, you fill it. A gap opens in the line, you close it. You make decisions with incomplete information and live with the results. Emily moved along the wall, low and fast, calling adjustments, pushing ammunition to positions that were running thin, pulling back 2 soldiers who'd exposed themselves chasing a target and were about to make a fatal error in judgment. Get back behind that barrier, now! You're not helping anyone dead. They listened, young, scared, functional, which was all she needed them to be right now. The assault broke at 2015 hours. Not a defeat, a withdrawal. The attacking force pulled back to the ridgeline with the methodical precision of a unit that had achieved its reconnaissance objective and didn't need to push further tonight. They'd probed the defenses. They knew where the gaps were. They'd be back. Emily stood at the south wall and watched the darkness where they'd been. Her hands were steady. Her heart rate was elevated, but controlled. The particular internal silence of combat focus, the state where everything non-essential went quiet, and the operational picture filled every available channel of attention. She'd missed it. She hadn't let herself think about that either. The medical tent had 4 occupied cots at midnight. By 0200 hours, it had 9. 3 killed in action. Emily got the count from the chief medic, a staff sergeant named Torres, who moved through the tent with the focused economy of someone who had learned to separate clinical function from emotional response. She had learned the same skill. It didn't make the count easier. It made it bearable, which was a different thing. She stood outside the medical tent and drank water from a canteen that had been sitting in the desert heat and tasted like warm plastic and minerals. Overhead, the stars were extraordinary, dense and cold and indifferent, the way stars in the desert always were. Jack found her there. He sat down next to her on the equipment crate without saying anything. He was favoring his right side slightly. She'd noticed it during the assault. The way he'd held himself when he moved, a subtle compensation in his posture that said something was wrong with his left side. He'd moved effectively throughout the fight, effectively enough that nobody who didn't know him would have caught it. She handed him the canteen without looking at him. He drank. 3, she said. I know. Specialist Warren, PFC Gutierrez, Staff Sergeant Okafor. She said the names because names mattered, because the specific, individual weight of each one needed to be acknowledged rather than absorbed into a number. Okafor had been here 8 months. He knew this FOB better than anyone. I know, Jack said again. She looked at him. The stars above them were brilliant and cold and completely indifferent, and there was something clarifying about that indifference. The universe offering no commentary on what had happened today, no moral verdict, just the ancient light of distant suns arriving on schedule, regardless of what human beings were doing underneath them. She'd always found the desert sky both comforting and brutal. It reminded her that the things that felt enormous in the moment were not enormous to history. That was either consolation or desolation, depending on the night. Tonight it was both. Your side, she said. It's nothing. Jack. Cracked rib, maybe two. He said it the way you said something that had already been decided. I taped it. I've run on worse. She wanted to argue. She didn't. He would still be here tomorrow regardless of what she said. And the energy spent arguing was energy she didn't have. If it gets worse, you tell me. I'll think about it. That means no, and we both know it. He almost smiled. She could see it in the lines around his eyes, even if his mouth didn't move. Water situation? He asked. Torres has been rationing since this afternoon. We had reserve for 72 hours before the attack. We burned through some of that with the medical cases, saline, wound irrigation. Realistically, we're looking at 48 hours before it becomes critical. Convoy. Gone. Whatever happened to that convoy happened before the attack started. She paused. I've been thinking about the timing. Tell me. She walked him through the communications log, the contractor's transmission, the manifest data that shouldn't have been accessible, the timing of the first strike relative to their landing. Jack listened without interrupting. That was something she'd always valued about him, the capacity to receive information completely before reacting to it. No one did that naturally. It was a discipline, and he'd built it so thoroughly over the decades that it looked natural. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The contractor on the C-130, he said, I need to find him. I have an ID, but I haven't been able to locate him physically since we landed. He's not in the manifest of current FOB personnel, and he's not in the medical tent. He could have taken the CH-47 out. The CH-47 didn't leave. It's still on the pad. We can't fly it out in this situation. She paused. He's here. He's just not where I can see him. Jack absorbed that. How much does Marsh know? He asked. Nothing yet. He's got enough on his plate. I don't want to pull his attention until I have more than a suspicion. That's the right call. He handed the canteen back. Get some rest. You first. He looked at her, the same look he'd been giving her for 8 years. The one that said he saw through the deflection and wasn't going to push because they both understood that the only way to get Emily Carter to rest was to remove the variables she was running in her head. And that wasn't going to happen tonight. 2 hours, he said. That's an order from a civilian with no authority whatsoever. She almost laughed. She went and found a cot. She stared at the canvas ceiling for 90 minutes and thought about the contractor's nod on the airplane. Dawn brought a dust storm. Not the catastrophic kind, not the wall of sand that turned noon into midnight, the persistent kind. A steady, gritty wind from the northwest that reduced visibility to 200 meters and turned everything the color of old bone. Fine particles that got into equipment, into eyes, into the mechanical interfaces of weapons. The kind of weather that turned a siege from a tactical problem into an attrition problem. And it killed the drone. The FOB's single surveillance UAV had been operational through the night, providing thermal coverage of the approaches. At 0617 hours, the feed went to static. At 0622, the UAV failed to respond to commands. At 0631, the visual on the camera feed showed the horizon tilting and then going dark. Crashed. Unknown position. Unknown cause. Wind? Marsh asked. Possibly. Emily looked at the telemetry data. But the wind speed was within operational parameters for that platform. The flight controller says it just stopped responding. Mechanical failure. That's one possibility. She kept her voice neutral. She was already thinking about the other possibility. A UAV that stopped responding to commands had either failed mechanically or been electronically disrupted. The same enemy that had managed a coordinated three-vector assault and a communications blackout was capable of electronic warfare. Or there was a third possibility she wasn't ready to voice yet. Marsh ran a hand over his face. He hadn't slept at all. She could tell from the particular texture of his eyes, not just fatigue, but the accumulated impact of 18 hours of continuous, high-stress cognitive load. He was functioning. He would continue to function for a while yet, but the clock was running. "What's our priority this morning?" he asked. "Water, then comms, then the eastern approach." She handed him the morning count. Kowalski's team reported vehicle movement on the eastern ridge at 0330. They couldn't get a count in the dark, but it wasn't small. Whatever's coming, it's going to come from a direction we can't currently see. Marsh looked at the report. Then he looked at the camp. She watched him do it. The full visual sweep of a commander doing a gut check assessment. Personnel moving with purpose but slower than yesterday, running on reduced rest and elevated stress. Medical tent fuller than it should be. Supply situation tightening. Communication with the outside world still intermittent and unreliable. "We're going to be okay," he said. He was saying it to himself as much as to her. She didn't contradict him, but she held a response in reserve. Whether they were going to be okay depended entirely on whether help was coming, and in the 4 communications windows they'd had in the past 16 hours, the answers from higher had been consistent. QRF was being assembled. Air support was being coordinated. Situation was being monitored. Monitored. She'd been in the gap between monitored and supported before. She knew how wide that gap could be when you were the one inside the wire. It happened at 1100 hours during the second probe. Not a full assault, a harassment attack. 20 to 30 fighters working the perimeter in small packets, keeping the defenders moving, burning ammunition, wearing at the nerves. Standard attrition tactics, textbook. Lieutenant Marsh had been awake for 26 hours. Emily was at the north wall when she heard his voice on the radio change pitch. She didn't register it consciously at first. It was the frequency shift that caught her, the particular vocal quality of a young officer whose internal model of the situation had stopped matching reality. She moved to the command post. Marsh was standing at the map table with the radio handset pressed to his ear, listening to a report from the eastern wall. His free hand was flat on the table, pressing down. The knuckles were white. "They're everywhere," he said to no one in particular. "They're at the north, the south, the east. How are we supposed to—" "Lieutenant," Emily's voice was even and quiet and direct. "Command register." The exact frequency she'd used on him 24 hours ago in this same position. He looked at her. "Give me the handset." He gave it to her. She keyed it. All stations, this is Carter. Hold your positions and hold your fire unless you have a clear target within 150 meters. They are trying to make you burn ammunition. Do not give it to them. Acknowledge by station." The stations acknowledged, one by one. The radio chatter settled. She put the handset down and looked at Marsh. His jaw was tight. The white-knuckle hand had come off the table. He was breathing, consciously, deliberately, the way someone breathes when they're using breath as a tool rather than an autonomic function. Good, he was still in there. "You're at hour 26, she said. "That's not weakness, that's math." I need to." "You need 60 minutes. Sergeant Kowalski has the watch. I have the radio. 60 minutes, Lieutenant. That is a direct order from your senior advisor." He looked like he was going to argue. Then he looked at the map. Then he looked at her. 60 minutes, he said. He walked to the back of the command post and sat against the wall and closed his eyes. She watched him for a moment. 23 years old and carrying 115 lives and running on nothing. The specific moral weight of that, of what the Army asked of young officers, and what it did and didn't prepare them for settled in her chest like something she'd been carrying for years without fully acknowledging. She thought about her own first siege, not Kestrel, before Kestrel, a smaller FOB, a shorter engagement, a situation that had resolved itself in 18 hours through luck and air support arriving faster than anyone had expected. She had been 24 years old, and she had held herself together through it by sheer force of the conviction that falling apart was not an option, that her soldiers could not afford to see her fall apart, that the appearance of control had to be maintained even when the internal reality was significantly less controlled. Jack had been there. He hadn't said anything during the fight. He hadn't needed to. His presence had been enough. The knowledge that there was someone in the room who had seen worse and was still standing and was not impressed by the chaos. Not dismissive of it, just not overwhelmed by it. She understood, standing here watching Marsh breathe against the command post wall, that she had become that person. Not because she felt particularly steady, she didn't feel particularly steady, but because steady was what was needed, and she was the one available to provide it. That was the inheritance of experience, not the absence of fear, the capacity to function inside it. She turned back to the radio. Outside, the harassment fire continued, methodical, patient, designed to grind. It was working. By 1400 hours, the medical tent had 14 occupied cots. Torres came to find Emily between the second and third probe of the afternoon. "The sergeant major," Torres said. "He came in an hour ago." Emily stopped moving. "How bad?" "Worse than 2 ribs. Looks like 3, possibly 4 on the left side. One might be fractured in a way that's putting pressure on his breathing. He needs imaging we don't have." Torres paused. "He didn't want me to tell you." Of course he didn't. She found Jack in the far corner of the medical tent, sitting upright on a cot with the specific posture of a man refusing to be horizontal because horizontal meant injured, and injured meant limited, and limited meant he couldn't help. He was looking at a map, reading glasses on, like it was a normal afternoon. "Torres told me," she said. "Torres has a big mouth. Torres has a good conscience." She pulled up a camp stool and sat in front of him, eye level. "Tell me what you can and can't do." He looked at her over the reading glasses. A long moment. The kind of look that contained a full argument. The argument for minimizing, for pushing through, for the particular veteran calculus that put mission above self because self had always been the cheaper currency. She'd seen him deploy that calculus her entire career. She let the look finish without blinking. "I can move," he said finally. "Slower than yesterday. The breathing it catches when I push hard. I can advise, I can plan, I can hold a position. I can't run, and I can't be in close contact. That limits your options significantly." "I've operated on limited options before." She wanted to say, "You're 63 years old, and you have fractured ribs, and we're inside a siege with no medevac and no confirmed extraction timeline, and I need you to be honest with me about your actual capability." She said, "Stay in the command post. Work the map and the radio. You're more valuable to me with eyes on the operational picture than you are on a wall." He considered that. She could see him running the honest assessment, not the pride-driven version, the operational one. The one that asked not what can I force myself to do, but where am I actually most effective? "Agreed," he said. She stood. "And Jack, if it gets worse, you tell Torres, not me, Torres, so he can make the medical call without going through me." "Why?" "Because I'll let you talk me out of it." She held his gaze. "Torres won't." Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but the emotional analog of one. The particular expression of a man recognizing something true about himself. "All right," he said. She left him to his map. Outside the tent, she stood for a moment in the blowing grit and did the math she hadn't let herself do until now. 3 dead, 14 in medical, Convoy gone. Drone down. Water at 48 hours. Ammunition adequate for now, thinning by the hour. No confirmed QRF timeline. No air support. And somewhere on this FOB, a contractor who had sold their position before the first round landed. The math didn't add up to fine, but it added up to manageable if she held every variable in place simultaneously and nothing new broke in the next 24 hours. Something new was going to break. It always did. She went back to the command post. She found him at 16:30 hours, not by accident, by systematic elimination. She had the contractor's ID. She had the knowledge that he was on the FOB and not in the medical tent and not on the active personnel roster, which meant he was somewhere in the support element, the logistics footprint, the maintenance area, the civilian contractor workspace in the rear of the administrative block. She found the administrative block. She found the contractor workspace. She found a small room off the main corridor with a padlocked door that was, on closer examination, locked from the inside. She knocked. Silence. She knocked again. FOB security sweep. Open the door. 30 seconds. Then the sound of movement. Then the lock disengaged and the door opened 4 inches, and she saw the face of the man from the C-130. His name, per the badge on his vest, was Martin Voss. Mid-40s, as she'd assessed on the airplane. The vest was not clean anymore. It had the rumpled, compressed look of someone who'd been sleeping in it. His eyes were alert but controlled, the professional calm still in place. The laptop case was on the floor behind him. "Miss Carter," he said, neutrally. The fact that he knew her name without introduction confirmed everything. "Mr. Voss," she kept her body in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other loose at her side. "I need to ask you about a transmission sent from this FOB at 11:18 hours yesterday." Something moved behind his eyes, very fast, very well controlled. But she'd spent 11 months reading the faces of people under extreme stress, and she'd caught it. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," he said. "The logistics update routed through base operations, the one that contained advisory personnel data from a system you don't have access to." She kept her voice level, conversational, like they were discussing a scheduling conflict. "The transmission that went out 90 minutes before we landed and approximately 90 minutes before the first mortar round hit. The 4-inch gap in the door didn't change. His body didn't change. But the quality of his stillness changed. It became the stillness of a calculation running rather than the stillness of genuine calm. "I'd like to speak with Colonel Hargrove," he said. "Colonel Hargrove is 200 miles away, and the comms are intermittent." She tilted her head slightly. "Right now, Mr. Voss, the only conversation available to you is this one." A long moment. "I want it on record," he said carefully, "that I acted under instruction from a properly authorized chain of command." She felt the cold clarity of it land. Not surprise. She'd been moving toward this conclusion for 16 hours. But the confirmation had a specific weight. A properly authorized chain of command, not rogue, not freelance, sanctioned. Someone above Voss had authorized a transmission. Someone with enough authority to instruct an embedded contractor to leak operational data through a logistics channel. Someone who had known that an attack was coming and had used Voss, and by extension, this FOB and everyone on it, as a mechanism for something she didn't yet fully understand. She looked at him for a long moment. "Don't go anywhere," she said. She locked the door from the outside. She walked back toward the command post with the contractor ID in her memory and a new, much larger question forming in her mind. Not who sold the coordinates, but why, and on whose authority, and to what end. She needed Jack. The outer wall breached at 18:45 hours, third assault of the day, bigger than the first 2. The dust storm had thickened through the afternoon, visibility down to 150 meters, and the enemy had used it the way a professional boxer uses the crowd, as cover for positioning that the defender couldn't track until the punch was already in motion. They came through the southeastern corner. An RPG team had been working the base of that wall section for 40 minutes during the afternoon probes. Not enough to breach it, enough to compromise the structural integrity of the HESCO barrier, so that when two vehicles hit it in tandem at 1845, the wall folded. Emily was at the command post when it happened. She felt it through the ground before she heard it, a deep, subsonic shudder, like a fault line shifting. Then the radio erupted. "Southeast corner! Breach! 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 We have vehicles inside the wire. I need support at the southeast motor pool, now." She was already moving. Marsh was with her, the 60 minutes of rest having returned something to his eyes. Kowalski was pulling personnel off the north wall to redirect south. The FOB's interior was suddenly a very different tactical problem than its exterior had been. Not a perimeter defense anymore, but a contested close-quarters environment where every building, every vehicle, every pile of equipment was potential cover for either side. She grabbed Marsh's arm, pulled him to a stop behind a concrete barrier. "Listen to me. Right now we have two imperatives and they are directly in conflict." He focused. "Tell me." "The breach point is in the southeast. That's the motor pool and the administrative block. The administrative block is where medical overflow is staged. We had to move 6 patients there an hour ago when the main tent hit capacity." She paused. "It's also where the comms intel archive is. Every transmission log, every operational record from this FOB for the past 8 months, including the evidence I collected this afternoon on the leak." She watched him absorb that. "If we commit everything to closing the breach, we protect the medical overflow. We protect Torres and 6 wounded soldiers who cannot protect themselves." She held his gaze. "If we split our force and send a secondary element to extract the intel archive before the enemy reaches it, we protect evidence that could expose whoever authorized this attack. We potentially save future lives. But we do it by thinning the line that's standing between a breach and the rest of our people." Marsh looked at her, 23 years old, 27 hours of command under siege. The kind of choice that ended careers if you made it wrong, and haunted you forever if you made it right. "What do you recommend?" he said. "I'm telling you the problem. The decision is yours." It was the right call. She knew it, and she could see that he knew it too. That having her make this decision for him would cost him something he couldn't afford to lose right now, which was the knowledge that he was capable of making it himself. He was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Medical takes priority," he said. "Full commitment to closing the breach. We protect our people first." He paused. "Can we get someone to the archive in the time we have?" "Possibly. I need 2 people in 5 minutes. Take Kowalski. I'll hold here." She moved. She found Kowalski at the eastern wall transition and pulled him off the line with a 2-sentence explanation. They moved through the FOB's interior at a low run, using the building lines for cover, the sound of contact at the southeast corner building steadily. She was 40 meters from the administrative block when the second RPG hit it. The explosion took out the north-facing wall of the building. The archive was inside. She felt the pressure wave and covered her face and kept moving, because stopping was the only thing she definitely couldn't do. She reached the building. The north wall was open to the desert. Inside, through the smoke, she could see the archive cabinet, still standing, scorched, the metal door warped but intact. She also saw the door to the room where she'd locked Martin Voss. It was open. He was gone. She got 3 drives out of the archive cabinet before the structure became untenable. She didn't know which drives contained the evidence she needed. She took the 3 most recent by date stamp and left. Kowalski pulled her back through the collapsed wall section as the ceiling began to come down. They made it to the motor pool perimeter as Marsh's team closed the breach. 15 minutes of close quarters fighting in the narrow channels between vehicles. The specific, brutal intimacy of CQB, where the range was measured in feet and the decisions were made in fractions of seconds. She heard it more than saw it. Controlled bursts, single shots, the sound of metal on metal, boot on concrete, the particular percussive report of a rifle fired in an enclosed space. The breach was closed at 1923 hours. The cost was 2 more wounded. The medical tent, now reorganized after the administrative block partial collapse, had 16 occupied cots. Emily stood at the edge of the motor pool and counted the faces of the soldiers around her. Numbering. Tracking. She had the 3 drives in her cargo pocket and the knowledge that Voss was somewhere on the FOB, uncontrolled, with information she didn't want him to have time to transmit. Jack found her. He'd moved from the command post when the breach alarm went up. Slower than he should have been, his breathing audible in a way it hadn't been this morning. He stopped next to her, and they stood looking at the southeastern corner of the FOB, where the wall had been. "Tell me about the archive," he said. She told him. All of it. Voss, the transmission, acted under instruction from a properly authorized chain of command. Jack was quiet for a long time. The desert wind moved through the gap in the wall, sand and grit and the smell of something still burning in the motor pool. The stars were starting to show at the edges of the dust storm, the way they did when the wind began to shift. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice had a quality she recognized from 8 years of knowing him, the specific weight of words that had been thought about carefully and held back until the right moment. Not reluctance, timing. "What?" she said. He was quiet for another moment. "Then, 2 years ago, I submitted a formal recommendation to the Pentagon. Not just the advisory I mentioned on the airplane, a full assessment. This FOB Kestrel specifically. The terrain exposure, the supply line vulnerability, the ratio of the garrison to the operational demand." He paused. "I recommended decommissioning it, rerouting its operational function through a more defensible position 40 kilometers east." She waited. The recommendation was reviewed at the Joint Staff level. It was declined. The official reason cited was operational continuity, Kestrel's position in the regional network. He looked at the gap in the wall. The unofficial reason, which I received through back channels, was cost. Relocating the operational function was estimated at $140 million. The budget cycle was the wrong time. She understood where this was going. She let him finish. "I pushed back. I escalated. I put the specific vulnerability assessment in writing with my name on it and sent it up 3 separate chains. Every time it was acknowledged and declined." He turned and looked at her. The reading glasses were gone. His eyes, in the ambient glow of the burning motor pool, were the same calm they'd always been. But the calm was load-bearing now, supporting something heavy. "3 of our people are dead. 16 are in that medical tent. The convoy is gone. And none of it, was operationally inevitable. This was a preventable situation." The words landed with a precision that words rarely achieved. Not anger, not blame. Grief, maybe. The specific grief of a man who had done everything he could do within a system that had declined to act, and was now standing inside the consequence of that inaction. "Who declined it?" she said. "The final authorization was signed by a 2-star, Brigadier General Patterson. He's currently on the Joint Staff." A pause. "He's also, as of 6 months ago, the oversight officer for the contracted support element operating out of this FOB. Emily looked at him. Voss. Acted under instruction from a properly authorized chain of command. A general who had declined to decommission a vulnerable FOB. A contractor who had leaked their coordinates before an attack. An attack that had begun within minutes of their arrival. She thought about the words operational continuity and cost, and the specific way institutions protected their decisions by ensuring the evidence of their failures remained unrecoverable. She thought about the 3 soldiers who were dead. Warren, Gutierrez, Okafor. She thought about the 16 people in the medical tent. She thought about the young soldiers on the perimeter who were burning through their reserves against an attack that should never have been possible from a position that should never have remained exposed. She thought about the particular silence that descended over institutions when someone in them said, "This is wrong," and the institution said, "Thank you for your input," and continued. She had spent her career inside that silence. She had filed reports and attended briefings and seen the gap between what the people closest to the ground knew and what the people furthest from it decided. She had left the army partly because of it, not entirely, not in a way she could have articulated cleanly, but the slow accumulation of that silence had been part of the weight she'd needed to put down. And now she was standing inside the specific, physical consequence of it. 3 drives in her cargo pocket, 1 missing contractor, a 2-star general's signature on a declined recommendation. The wreckage of a wall that didn't need to be here. She thought about the 3 soldiers who were dead and felt something move through her that wasn't anger exactly. Anger was too simple, too directed, but was the emotional equivalent of a structural load finally being acknowledged. The full weight of it, the actual number on the scale. She looked at Jack. He was watching her the way he'd watched her through every difficult moment she could remember. Not with pity, not with the careful management of someone trying to prevent her from falling apart, but with the direct, patient attention of someone who trusted her to process what needed processing and come out the other side still functional. She always had. "Who declined it?" she said. "I know." Jack's voice was steady. "We also need to make it to morning." She looked at him, at the wall gap, at the desert beyond it, dark and vast and full of patience. "Can you hold the command post through the night?" "Yes." "Then hold it." She checked her weapon. "I'll find Voss." She didn't find Voss that night. She found his laptop. It was in the wreckage of the administrative block, partially buried under a section of collapsed ceiling. The screen was shattered. The hard drive, when she got Torres to look at it, appeared physically intact, but she had no way to read it without equipment they didn't have. She kept it. At 2,200 hours, a 4th assault began. Smaller, 20 fighters, testing the breach point they'd created, finding it closed and reinforced. It lasted 35 minutes and cost the FOB 2 more wounded and a generator hit that took down the western sector lighting. Emily ran the western perimeter in the dark. At 100 hours, she got a comms window and sent up a sit-rep to the rear echelon. 3 KIA, 18 WIA, breach closed, supplies critical. She transmitted it in 60 seconds, and the window closed before the acknowledgement came back. At 0300 hours, Marsh found her at the north wall. "You need to rest," he said. He looked different than 24 hours ago. Not rested, nothing close to rested, but soldiered through the threshold into a different kind of functioning. The kind that came on the other side of the initial panic, when a young officer discovered that the thing they'd been most afraid of, the moment of real decision, real consequence, real command, was survivable. It didn't make you unafraid. It made you operational despite the fear. She looked at him for a moment. "You're doing well," she said. He blinked, like he hadn't expected it. Like in the torrent of the past 30 hours, nobody had said a functional thing to him that wasn't a problem to be solved. "I don't know about that," he said. "I do." She meant it. The choice at the breach, you made it in 4 seconds, and you made it right. That's what command is. He was quiet for a moment, something working behind his eyes, not sentiment, something more functional than that. The internal revision of a self-assessment that had been running too negative. "The admin block," he said. "The 6 patients, they're okay." "I know." "That's what mattered." "Yes," she said, "that's what mattered." He nodded once, then, "Get 2 hours. I've got it." She found a corner of the command post, sat against the wall with her rifle across her knees, and was asleep in under 4 minutes. She dreamed about the sprinkler in the Bernie backyard, the slow mechanical arc, the indifferent lawn. She woke up 90 minutes later with the sound of the desert wind and the specific, certain knowledge that the morning was going to be worse than the night. She was right. At 0430 hours, with the sky beginning to lighten in the east, Sergeant Kowalski found her. "Captain," his voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man reporting something he didn't want to be reporting. "The Western Reserve ammunition point, someone got to it." She was on her feet before he finished the sentence. The ammunition was not gone. That would have been too obvious. What had been done was surgical. The propellant charges on approximately a third of the mortar rounds had been removed, and the rounds resealed. Visually identical, functionally useless. And approximately 40% of the 5.56 magazines stacked in the reserve crates had been loaded with rounds that had been individually cycled to extract the primer. Duds, invisible until they failed to fire. She stood at the ammunition point in the gray pre-dawn light and understood, with a cold, settling clarity, the full operational picture. The attack from outside, the sabotage from inside, the timing of the breach at the most vulnerable section of the wall. Voss wasn't just a leaker, he was an active saboteur, and he was still somewhere on the FOB. She picked up her radio. All stations, this is Carter, emergency security sweep. All personnel, verify your ammunition. I say again, verify your ammunition. Report any anomalies immediately." She waited. The sky got lighter. The reports came in. The ammunition situation was worse than she'd assessed by a factor of 2. They were going into the next assault with a fraction of what they thought they had. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and started doing the math of what was still possible. There was still time. Not much, but some. She keyed the radio. "Marsh, command post, now!" The morning was coming. Outside the wire, in the dark and the dust, in the patient silence of the desert, the enemy was also doing math. Their math was simpler. A weakened garrison, compromised ammunition, a breach point they already knew. They would come at first light with everything they had. She was going to be ready for it. She had 40 minutes before first light. Emily laid it out on the map table with Marsh and Kowalski standing across from her. The three of them in the red-lit command post while the desert wind moved through the gap in the southeast wall and brought with it the smell of burnt metal and old smoke. "They know our ammunition situation," she said. "Voss had access to the supply manifest, which means they're coming at first light expecting a garrison that can't sustain a prolonged defense." She tapped the breach point. "They'll hit here again. It's their established entry, and they know the structural weakness. Secondary push will come from the south to split our attention." She moved her finger to the eastern approach. "The east has been quiet for 36 hours. That's not because they don't have assets there. It's because they've been holding them." Marsh studied the map. 3-vector assault. Likely, and they'll push hard because they expect us to fold quickly. Kowalski crossed his arms. "We've got maybe 60% of our actual ammunition if we strip the sabotaged rounds. 40 effectives on the line." 42, Marsh said quietly. Kowalski looked at him. "I counted twice." Marsh's voice was flat and steady. Not bravado, arithmetic. 42 on the line, 6 in medical who can hold a weapon from a fixed position. Torres has them staged. He paused. "I asked Torres an hour ago. He said if they're given a rifle and told to stay behind cover, 4 of them would do it." Emily looked at him. The 23-year-old lieutenant who had frozen at the map table 2 days ago was gone. What remained was something harder and quieter, not fearless, but functional. The thing that happened when a young officer discovered the difference between theoretical command and the real thing, and decided to close the gap with their body. "All right," she said, "here's what we do." She told them. The plan was not complex. Simple plans survive contact with the enemy better than elegant ones. She had learned that at Benning, and relearned it every deployment since. Clarity of purpose and simplicity of execution were the only tactical constants that held under pressure. They would not defend the walls. They would let the assault come in. The breach point at the southeast would be left nominally covered, enough presence to suggest active defense, thin enough that the assault element would commit to the entry. Once they were inside the wire, inside the motor pool's tight geometry of vehicles and equipment, the advantage shifted from the attacker's momentum to the defender's knowledge of terrain. Emily had spent 11 months learning every foot of this FOB. She would use that now. The assault came at 05:12, 18 minutes before dawn. They came through the breach exactly as she'd predicted. 40-plus fighters, moving in two elements through the southeast gap, low and fast, using the dust in the pre-dawn dark. They were professional. They were confident. They moved like men who had been told the garrison was ammunition depleted and dispirited. Emily was behind the third vehicle in the motor pool, with Kowalski on her right and two privates on her left, and she let them come all the way in before she keyed the radio. All stations, execute. The next 8 minutes were brutal. The motor pool became a killing ground, not through superior firepower because they didn't have it, but through controlled chaos and intimate knowledge. Emily moved between the vehicles with the fluency of someone who had walked this ground 1,000 times in the dark. She knew where the tight corridors were, where the sight lines opened unexpectedly, where a man coming through the gap would be silhouetted against the gray sky for exactly the 3 seconds needed. She was not thinking, she was executing. The body carrying 11 months of operational knowledge, and the mind cleared of everything except the next 10 feet. Kowalski took down two fighters at close range near the maintenance bay, and then lost his radio to a round that hit the handset without hitting him. He kept moving. She saw him twice more in the chaos, each time doing what needed doing, each time moving with the particular economy of a seasoned NCO who had stopped counting and started just working. The secondary push came from the south wall at 0519, 7 minutes after the main element. Marsh held it. She heard it on the net, his voice calm and directed, working his section of the line with the situational awareness of someone who had stopped being scared of the responsibility and started being defined by it. She didn't have time to listen closely. She had her own problems. At 0524, she came around the front of a LMTV and found herself face-to-face with a fighter at 4 meters. She was faster. She didn't think about it afterward. There wasn't time. The next problem was already arriving. At 0531, the dust storm shifted. It came from the northwest, the way the worst ones always came. Not gradually, but all at once. A wall of compressed desert moving at 40 miles an hour and reducing visibility to 0 in under 60 seconds. She felt it coming in the pressure change, the particular stillness before it hit, and she keyed the radio before it arrived. All stations, storm incoming northwest, 30 seconds. Break contact and hold your positions. Do not pursue. Let it cover you. Acknowledge. The acknowledgments came. The storm hit. The motor pool disappeared into a wall of gray-brown nothing. She pressed against the vehicle she was behind, head down, and counted to 30. The wind was a physical force, trying to find purchase on anything it could move. Sand filled her ears, her collar, the gap between her helmet and her neck. The sound was total, a roar that occupied every frequency, that made radio impossible and shouting pointless. She counted to 60. The storm began to thin. She raised her head. The motor pool was still. 5 enemy combatants down in the immediate area. The others had withdrawn under the cover of the storm, unwilling to continue a close quarters fight in 0 visibility against an opponent who knew the terrain. The breach point was visible through the clearing dust. The assault was over. She keyed the radio. Her voice was steady. All stations, report. The reports came in. 1 more wounded on the south wall. Nobody killed. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, breathed. Then she went to find Voss. She found Jack at the north wall. He had not stayed in the command post. He was at the sandbag position at the north wall's elevated corner, a sniper nest that gave a clear line of sight to both the northern approach and the eastern ridgeline. He was in a prone position with a rifle, which he should not have been in given the condition of his ribs, and he was completely still in the particular way of a man who has decided that the pain is a manageable variable and has managed it. She came up behind him. "I told you command post," she said. "Eastern Ridge." His voice was strained but even. "Vehicle movement at 0449. 3 trucks, 40-degree angle from the main assault. They were positioning to flank if the main element succeeded." He didn't take his eye from the optic. They didn't get the flanking order to move because the main element didn't signal success. A pause. "They're still there." She looked east. The dust was thinning. 3 vehicles on the ridgeline, barely visible, holding position. "You kept them from flanking," she said. "I kept their heads down." He shifted slightly, and she heard the catch in his breathing. A sharp, suppressed sound that told her the ribs were significantly worse than this morning. One of them got ambitious around 0515. "He won't try again." She looked at him. The gray light of early morning, the dust still moving, the rifle in his hands. 63 years old, 2 or 3 fractured ribs, a shoulder that ached in weather, prone in a sniper nest, holding off a flanking element during a siege he had tried to prevent 2 years ago from a Pentagon office in Virginia. She didn't say anything for a moment. "Torres," she said finally, "when we're done." "Now, Jack." He turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were clear. The pain was there. The exhaustion was there. But behind both of them was the same thing that had always been there. The steady, load-bearing calm of a man who had decided a very long time ago what he was willing to pay for the things that mattered. "The trucks on the ridge," he said. "I'll have Kowalski watch them." A pause. 5 more minutes. She looked at the ridge, at the trucks that weren't moving, at the gradually brightening sky where, if anything in the past 72 hours had gone according to the assurances they'd received, air support should be appearing. 5 minutes, she said. She stayed with him. She didn't have a reason that was strictly tactical. She stayed because the north wall at dawn with Jack Donovan was preferable to being anywhere else right now, and because some accountings needed to be done in proximity rather than at a distance. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the first FA-18 came over the ridgeline at low altitude, fast and loud and entirely indifferent to the drama of the past 72 hours, and began the work of ending the siege from above. Jack lowered his rifle. "There they are," he said. She found Voss in the motor pool. Not a coincidence. She'd been narrowing his possible locations all morning. The FOB wasn't large, and a man trying to stay hidden while remaining close enough to his objective was constrained to a limited number of positions. She'd thought about his objective. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to ensure the archive was destroyed and the evidence on those drives became unrecoverable. He didn't know she had the drives. He was at the back of the motor pool, near the vehicle maintenance bay, working at a panel on the FOB's secondary generator, the one that powered the communications bunker. He had a small device in his hand that she recognized as a transmitter. If the comms bunker lost power at the right moment, any outgoing transmission carrying the evidence on those drives would be interrupted. If he could additionally trigger a fire in the generator housing, the disruption could be explained as battle damage. He heard her at 15 feet. He was fast. She gave him that. Faster than a mid-40s logistics contractor had any right to be, which told her something about his actual training background. He was up and moving before she had her weapon fully raised, putting a vehicle between them. And for 3 seconds they were in the specific, absurd geometry of 2 people moving around a large stationary object, each trying to get an angle on the other. She stopped moving. "Voss," her voice was flat. "The assault is over. Air support is on station. There is no version of this that ends with you transmitting anything. His voice came from the other side of the vehicle, controlled, professional. I told you, Miss Carter, I acted under authorization. I know you did. She kept her position. I have the drives. I have the transmission log. I have your contractor ID embedded in the manifest header. She paused. Whatever authorization you were given, it didn't include this FOB's casualties. It didn't include Okafor and Warren and Gutierrez. I don't think you authorized that. A silence. She kept talking, not to fill the space, because the space was a tactical variable and she was using it. You built a career doing what you were told by people with enough authority to make it seem legitimate. That's not nothing. But you're on the wrong side of this one and you know it. And the question right now is whether you come out from behind that vehicle or whether I come around it. Another silence. Longer. Then Martin Voss stepped out from behind the vehicle with his hands visible and the transmitter held loosely in his left hand. The gesture of a man who was making a specific and conscious choice about which way this went. She took the transmitter. She zip-tied his wrists with the same economical efficiency she would have applied to any piece of equipment that needed to be secured. Sit down, she said. He sat. She called it in on the radio. The QRF helicopters landed at 0714. 4 Blackhawks, a medical evacuation bird, and 2 Apache escorts still working the outer perimeter where scattered elements of the attacking force were attempting to withdraw. The sound of them coming in was one of the better sounds Emily had heard in several days. She stood in the LZ and watched them come down. 19 wounded, 4 killed in action, 42 soldiers who had held through the night on sabotaged ammunition against a force that had known their defensive layout, their water situation, and their command structure. The math of it, the stark numerical summary of 72 hours, sat in her chest with a weight that was going to be there for a long time. Marsh was at her shoulder. He'd been slightly behind her since the assault ended, the way soldiers position themselves relative to the person who'd gotten them through something. Not dependent, just proximate. The gravitational pull of shared experience. Sir, she addressed him directly, your people held. He looked at the arriving helicopters for a moment. The LZ was controlled chaos, medics moving, personnel directing, the particular organized urgency of extraction in process. We lost 4, he said. You did, and you held. She turned to face him. Those are both true simultaneously. They will always be both true simultaneously. That's command. He looked at her, something in his face doing the adjustment that command experience always required. The recalibration from the ideal to the real, from the training scenario where the goal was 0 losses, to the operational reality where the goal was mission completion, and the losses were a cost that had to be borne and accounted for, but not allowed to paralyze. The decision at the breach, she said, the 6 patients, you put your people first. You told me to. I gave you the problem. You made the call. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the intel, the drives, being packaged right now for the QRF to carry out. She paused. The evidence on those drives, combined with Voss's statement about who authorized the leak, that goes to investigators who are not in General Patterson's chain of command. That was the first thing I specified to the QRF commander. Marsh absorbed that. The implication of a general's name in this context was significant, and he was smart enough to understand it without having it explained. Will it matter? She considered the honest answer, the one that her 14 months in Bernie had partially been about, the one that acknowledged what institutions did and didn't do with evidence of their own failures. How many recommendations got filed and forgotten, and how many warnings went unanswered, and how many Kestrels had to happen before the system found it could no longer look away. It matters that it exists, she said finally. What the system does with it, That's a different fight. But it matters that it exists, and that it's documented, and that someone who authorized this can't make it disappear. She looked at him. Sometimes that's all you can do. Make sure the record is accurate. He nodded slowly. The processing of a young man adding a layer of knowledge he hadn't had 72 hours ago. Not cynicism, not quite, but the beginning of the specific adult understanding that moral action and institutional consequence were not always the same thing, and that the first was worth pursuing regardless of the second. A good lesson, an expensive one. Torres had Jack in the medical tent by 0730. The imaging from the QRF's medical kit confirmed 4 fractured ribs on the left side. 2 of them were clean breaks. One had a fragment displaced inward by less than a millimeter, a margin that Torres described as extremely fortunate, with the specific flat affect of a medic who had seen the less fortunate version. Emily sat next to his cot while Torres finished the assessment. Jack was looking at the canvas ceiling. The reading glasses were on the equipment crate next to him. He looked smaller horizontal than vertical, not diminished, just differently sized. The specific recalibration that beds imposed on people who were always upright. 4, she said. Torres likes to count carefully. He's good at his job. Yes, Jack said, he is. She looked at her hands for a moment. The accumulated grime of 72 hours, sand, smoke, things she wasn't going to itemize. She should clean up. She would after this. The flanking element, she said, on the ridge. If you hadn't held them, they'd have come in from the east during the main assault. We wouldn't have had the numbers to cover it. Someone would have covered it. Maybe, she looked at him. You didn't have to be on that wall. Neither did you. She let that sit for a moment. I put the recommendation in writing, he said, not changing his tone, still looking at the ceiling. 2 years ago, 3 separate chains of command. I made the record as accurate as I could make it, and I submitted it, and it was declined. His voice was even, not defeated, processing, doing what he always did, which was engage with the unpleasant truth directly rather than around it. And those 4 soldiers are still dead. Yes, she said, the record existing didn't prevent what happened. No, but the record existing matters, he said. It wasn't a question. He was thinking it through out loud, the way he did when he was working towards something he hadn't fully articulated yet. Because the next Kestrel, if the evidence lands where it should, if Patterson is held accountable, if someone at the joint staff level reads a report and understands that declined recommendations have body counts attached to them, the next one might not happen. Might, she said. Might. He accepted the word. That's the gap you work in. That's the gap we've always worked in. He turned his head and looked at her. The clear, direct eyes. The particular quality of someone who had spent decades inside the system and retained both the capacity for frustration with it and the decision to keep working. How are you? The question landed differently here than it did on Sunday phone calls. She thought about it. I don't know yet, she said, which was the most honest answer she'd given to that question in 14 months. He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded, the specific Jack Donovan nod that meant, that's the right answer without requiring him to say so. Get cleaned up, he said. There's going to be a lot of people with questions shortly, and you should be the one who answers them. She stood. Jack, she paused at the foot of his cot. When you're cleared, weeks, not days, come to Bernie. I make decent coffee. He almost smiled. Is that an invitation or an order? Both, she said. She left him to Torres in the canvas ceiling and the reading glasses on the equipment crate. Colonel Hargrove arrived on the second wave of helicopters at 0900 hours. He was older than his voice had suggested, silver-haired, lean, with the careful posture of a man who had spent decades managing the distance between what he knew and what he was authorized to say. He shook her hand at the LZ and held it a fraction of a second longer than necessary, the specific grip of someone who had received her sit-rep transmissions through the night and understood what that summary had cost. "Ms. Carter," he said. "Colonel." He walked the FOB with her. She gave him the operational summary in crisp, factual sentences. The timeline, the assault sequence, the ammunition sabotage, Voss in his statement, and the drives in their sealed evidence bags. The name of the general who had declined to decommission a vulnerable FOB 2 years ago, and whose authorized contractor had helped an attacking force coordinate the timing of their assault. Hargrove listened without interruption. He was good at that, another quality she noted without necessarily trusting it. At the end, he was quiet for a long moment. "What you've put together," he said carefully, "is going to create significant institutional disruption." "Yes," she said, "it should." He looked at her, recalibrating something. "The evidence is solid." "It is." A pause. "I want to offer you something." He stopped walking. They were at the eastern wall, looking out at the ridgeline where Jack's trucks had been. The desert beyond the wire was still and quiet, the dust storm fully dissipated now, the sky a clean, pale blue. "Full reinstatement, captain, with a path to major within 18 months, attached to the Assessment and Advisory Directorate, which is where this kind of analytical work should be happening, where you could prevent the next Kestrel through the system rather than surviving it after it's already started." She listened to the full offer. She looked at the desert, pale blue sky, low ridgelines, a silence that was temporary, and they both knew it. She thought about Bernie, the sprinklers and the coffee and the mockingbird on the fence post. She thought about 14 months of white walls and 0400 mornings and running the tactical assessment of a house that didn't need it. She thought about whether what she'd been doing was healing or waiting. She thought about Jack on that cot, looking at the canvas ceiling. The next one might not happen. Might. The gap you work in. She turned and faced Hargrove. The medical evacuation bird lifted at 10:15. Jack was on it, secured, stable, reading his manual with the flashlight clipped to his collar because Torres had taken the reading glasses and Jack had found a workaround. She watched the helicopter until it was a shape, then a sound, then nothing. She helped load the last of the equipment and the evidence packages and the 4 flag-draped transfer cases that were going back with everything else. She did it with the full attention it deserved. No compartmentalization, no operational distance. The specific present acknowledgement of Warren and Gutierrez and Okafor and the 4th, Private First Class Aaron Cole, 19 years old, from Boise, Idaho, who had been killed in the close quarters fight at the motor pool breach at 0527, and whose name she had added to the list the moment she'd learned it. 4 names. She said them. Marsh was nearby, doing the same work, loading and accounting and acknowledging. He looked up at one point and caught her eye across the LZ, and they held that for a moment. 2 people who had been through the same 72 hours and would carry different parts of it. He nodded. She nodded back. At 10:45, Kowalski found her at the perimeter. "QRF's ready to move," he said. "You're on the last bird." She looked at the FOB, what remained of it, the repaired southeast wall, rough and functional, the motor pool, the medical tent, empty now, the command post where Marsh had held through the night, the north wall where Jack had spent the dawn. She looked at the desert beyond the wire, patient, unchanged, entirely indifferent to what had happened inside these walls. She picked up her kit. She walked to the helicopter. She didn't answer Hargrove until the helicopter was in the air. He was sitting across from her in the Black Hawk, and the noise made conversation impossible. And that had given her 45 minutes of altitude and distance, and the particular clarity that came from being above a problem rather than inside it. She looked out the window. The FOB shrank below them. A square of walls and structures in a vast, pale desert, the scale of it only visible from above. How small the thing was that had contained so much weight. How much desert there was around it. How little the desert cared about either. She thought about the offer. She thought about what she'd said to Jack. I came back once. That was enough. She had believed that when she said it. Standing on the back step in Bernie with the mockingbird on the fence post, she had believed it completely. And in some important sense, it remained true. The version of her that had left the army 14 months ago, that needed the sprinklers and the coffee and the white walls to find her footing again, that version had been right to leave when she did. But that version had also spent 14 months at 0400, running the tactical assessment of a house that didn't need it. The gap between done and finished was not a small one. She thought about Marsh on the line. Marsh at the map table, 4 seconds, the right call. Marsh this morning with his eyes clear and his voice steady, and the particular quality of someone who had found what they were made of under the worst possible conditions, and was going to carry that forward. She thought about the drives in the evidence bags, the record that existed now, the name of a general attached to a decision that had killed 4 people who hadn't needed to die. She thought about Jack's voice. The next one might not happen. Might was not certainty. But it was not nothing. She looked at Hargrove across the cabin. He was watching her. He'd been watching her for most of the flight, with the patient attention of a man who understood that the answer was processing and would arrive when it arrived. She held up one finger. He leaned forward. She said over the rotor noise, "One condition." He nodded. Patterson, full investigation, independent of his chain. The evidence goes to the IG office, not internal review. She held his gaze. That condition is non-negotiable. Hargrove was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she understood the weight of what she was requiring. Not just accountability, but the specific institutional disruption that came from an IG investigation into a general officer, which was the kind of thing that sent shockwaves through networks and relationships and carefully maintained understandings about how things worked. Agreed, he said. She looked back out the window. The desert was very large. The FOB was no longer visible. Below them, the pale landscape stretched in every direction without evident boundary, without feature, patient and vast and indifferent. She watched it for a long time. When they landed at the rear echelon base, she stepped off the helicopter and stood for a moment in the heat, in the clean, non-smoky air. The particular quality of a place that hadn't been in a fight recently. She could feel the difference. Later, when the debriefs were done, and the paperwork was started, and the evidence packages were in the right hands, and Marsh had been pulled aside by the QRF commander for the conversation that would eventually turn into a commendation, she found a satellite phone and called the number she'd memorized 14 months ago, because some numbers you kept, even when you were trying to put distance between yourself and the reasons you had them. Jack picked up on the second ring. "How are you?" he said. She thought about it. "Working on it," she said. The best answer she had. In the distance, somewhere over the desert, the sound of rotors. War, she thought, did not wait for you to finish working on it, but it always told you where to find it. She pocketed the phone and went back to work. She looks at the desert. "I came back once. That was enough." Jack. War always asks twice.